Okay, awesome. All right, yeah. Thanks a lot for coming out. And first of all, I want to ask you guys, just to get to know you, does anyone here is currently employed as a programmer, working somewhere for a company? Cool, awesome. I think I've seen you before, somewhere. I don't know. And who's interested in learning how to program, or who's had tried around with learning how to program before? All right, cool. And who's here for the free pizza? So the rest. Oh, there's pizza, right? Yeah. I didn't mean to spoil anything. Right, cool. So I'll give you a quick background on me. I actually come from a very small city at the Lake of Constance, and it's very beautiful, but it doesn't have a lot of people. Oh, that's great. And apparently the top half of my slide is missing, whatever. And for the last 3 to 4 years, I was vagabonding, and I was living in places like Vancouver and places like Melbourne in Australia. And I took on several different jobs, and it was all sorts of jobs, all kinds of jobs, just to afford my living, pay my rent. And I actually, at some point, I worked as a door-to-door salesman for 2 days, and then they fired me because I was allegedly stealing company secrets. I don't know. I just took notes because I was interested in whatever they were teaching. Anyways, that was my door-to-door sales career. Ended pretty quickly. And eventually, last summer in 2013, I decided to move to Berlin. I think I don't really have to explain why I moved to Berlin. It's a pretty rad city. It's really cheap, it's big, it's international, and you can pretty much do anything you want to do if you know the right places or the right kind of people. And I eventually got interested into programming last year, and I decided to take some online courses, read some books on it, and eventually that led me down to going to New York for 3 months and attending a programming boot camp. And yeah, I will talk about that as well. Before I get to that though, I want to mention something, because this is about my experience at that school and kind of like the tools that we have out here to learn how to code or how to program. But apart from that, I feel like I should mention that it was also answering a second question for me, which was, what should I do, kind of like what should I do with my life? So the first question that it answered was, what's the fastest way to kind of get into that field? And the second one was, for me, is that something that I could see myself pursuing as a career or something like that? And I guess I became a parent of that because I feel like what we want to do is such an important question. And for me, the kinds of people that I met over the last 3 or 4 years and the friends that I made, I observed in many of them that they weren't really answering that question hard enough. And by that I mean a lot of people actually dropped out of university or changed their majors or changed their careers after the fact. And that was just something that I thought didn't make sense. And even if they didn't, if I ask any of my friends, what do you want to do after you're done studying, a lot of them didn't have any concrete answers and couldn't tell me why they did what they did. So I feel like this is a very important question, and this is why I wanted to mention it. So obviously, I'm not going to talk too much about traditional education because I never studied and thus don't have a lot of experience in the matter. So I can only talk about some numbers, and I guess I'll crack right into the several tools that we have for learning stuff online. Starting with the most traditional one, which is university. And yeah, to just throw some numbers at you, I guess the first number is 5. I'd say it usually takes 5 years to get your master's degree here in Germany, at least. And 5 years is a lot of time. I'm not sure if you guys agree, but I feel like sometimes I'm the only one kind of like considering that. But we here in Germany, we're pretty fortunate because education is virtually free. But 5 years is still a long time. I mean, you could probably learn 5 languages, like speaking 5 languages fluently, or you could travel to maybe up to, I don't know, 50 countries maybe. Or you could spend your time playing Minecraft like this guy and building like a crazy Minecraft city in 2 years. It's actually you have 5 years, so you can make like an even crazier Minecraft city. Or in the 5 years you can start working. And I feel like that if you choose a path that takes maybe a year or maybe 2 years to get you ready to start working, you have an edge over other people who take longer. And I don't mean in terms of competitiveness, I mean more in terms of the time that you save to do other stuff. So as I mentioned before, we're pretty lucky here in Germany, and our education is pretty cheap. But again, we have the opportunity cost of losing those 5 years. And I don't know, this is really something that bugged me a lot of time and definitely led to my decision in pursuing something like a programming bootcamp, where a sort of a longer period of time is condensed in a very short amount of time. And I think especially in Germany, what we also tend to see is that a lot of people, like I mentioned before, a lot of people who finish their studies are sort of starting all over again. I was at a house party last weekend, and I coincidentally talked to a guy who studied law. And law is a little bit of an extreme example. It took him 7 years to finish his studies. And he did tell me that after those 7 years, he still sort of, even though he focused on environmental law, which was his focus, and he ended up working in that sector afterwards, he still sort of had to start over. And not completely, obviously, but he said his job was so utterly and completely different from what he was learning in his university that, for him it was just, he had to start over in that terms. So this is another thing. You might study something and then you end up in a job that might be related to those studies, but you still have to sort of like get into the job and sort of learn on the job. And this is also something I feel like it's kind of like an extension of our school system, that you learn a lot of stuff that you don't end up needing. And also, I feel like we shouldn't ignore the United States, where education is not free. It's the complete opposite. It's very, very expensive. And I've talked to a lot of my friends from New York, and many of them had taken on student loans, and they were indebted, between like $80,000 to $200,000 after their studies. So I'm not sure if they could even like work that off in 5 years and pay back. So talk about opportunity cost there. And yeah, and I think this is especially why we should really focus on that question, what do we really want to do before rushing into something, or just kind of just coping, or just going along with what everyone else is doing. So this is as far as I'm going to go on traditional education. Like I said, it's just a few observations that I made. And in terms of online education, there are a few ways to learn how to program or to learn more about coding and just in general. And the most, I guess, popular one are massively open online courses called MOOCs. And this really just started like 3 to 4 years ago and became wildly popular with up to 100, 120,000 students enrolling for one class or one course. And I think at the time of April around this year, there were 200, like 2,200, like around 2,200 courses available that you could take and that you can learn. And the downside of this format, and I love that format, by the way. I'll just tell you the pros and cons from my perspective. But one of the downsides that I could see to this is that it just takes a lot of discipline and a lot of dedication to finish these courses, because they're completely self-directed. So you have approximately 5 to 20 hours a week that you need to do, also over the course of up to 9 to 12 weeks, and you have no one that you can sit down with and sort of talk about it. And the only course that I ever finished was the Stanford Startup Engineering course, which the only reason why I finished it was that I had a group and we met up every 2 weeks at Beta House and sort of talked through problem sets and worked on them together. And I've started some other courses, and some of them I finished halfway through, the other ones I just started. But overall, the completion rate for MOOCs is just below 7%. So they are great, and they offer a lot of things. If you sort of can sort through the jungle of all that is being offered, and but it takes a lot of discipline to kind of pull through, and that's definitely one downside that I noticed. And then apart from that, obviously, we have other online tools such as Codecademy or Code School or Treehouse, which I'm sure many of you have heard of before. And they kind of go the opposite way. They're more modular than MOOCs. They tend to be shorter, and they're heavily gamified. So this is definitely one huge thing that they have on top of MOOCs, because people, they tend to be really engaging, and people, tend to have shorter, just shorter lessons, shorter modules to finish. So Codecademy, for example, they have a REPL, which means you don't have to set up anything on your computer. You just log into your browser, and it's a bunch of JavaScript magic that is happening and some other stuff. And yeah. But then again, this I feel like also has its downsides, because as far as I'm concerned, at least on Codecademy, not a lot of courses are really advanced. So they cover the basics and sort of get you starting, but they're not very challenging or not very interesting. And that was also one problem that I had with them, because you're just typing in stuff, you're reading the little sort of direction introduction, which is all fair games, but I think it's not as engaging as it could be. And then last but not least, we have books. So books are one of my favorite. I think books are awesome, especially these kind of books, ebooks, because you can download them, sweet. And books also offer the advantage that most of the time they're very organized. The people who work them, they put a lot of time into writing these books, and it tends to be a great resource in researching something that you might not be as familiar with. But again, the downside being that I kind of think that books, especially if you're starting out, if you're a beginner, it can kind of get overwhelming, because you have, especially technical books, you have chapters with, like, I don't know, 30, 40 sub-chapters on each class and method and whatnot. So books, I would say, are great as soon as you get some sort of experience, or, unless you're the kind of person that really digs books and that can really work with them and sort of extract the most out of them to learn programming. So